You're listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. To guide us through the intricacies and intersections of emotions, relationships, and male identity is renowned psychologist, author, and speaker Gunter Swoboda. This is Inspire Change.
I want to introduce a tradition here for this podcast and all future podcasts, wherein I'd like to respectfully acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. They are the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet. I pay my respects to the elders, past and present. Knowing the stories of the Aboriginal people will always be written in this landscape. Welcome everybody to another episode of Inspired Change with Gunter. Yes, it's that time of year, December, and we're heading into the silly season. For some, that represents lots of joy and lots of harmony and gifts and all things good. For others, unfortunately, this particularly festive season is not so festive. A lot of people are going to be finding themselves in this period of time alone, lonely, feeling stressed. But one of the common issues that manifests itself around this particular time of year, although it is an all-round theme, is the issue of anxiety. And I thought in this particular episode, I want to focus on anxiety, and I want to draw that together with Albert Ellis's REBT. But in order to do that, I'm going to leave what I did in the last episode to some degree and focus on looking at what anxiety actually is. I want to talk about anxiety in its various shapes and sizes because, we may talk about anxiety as if it's one thing, and it isn't. So where shall we start? Well, let me start from the perspective that I come at it from, and that is that of a clinician. So many times people are referred to me, and they're referred to me with a diagnosis from their medical practitioners as suffering from depression. And I've mentioned this before, that a lot of times when I do what's called a differential diagnosis, and that is, a very deep assessment of what the person's experiencing and has been experiencing, then they may appear to be suffering from depression, but in many, many instances, one of the things that I eventually find out and uncover is that the person's actually experiencing a form of anxiety disorder. Now, as I implied earlier on, let's talk about all those things that we consider to be anxiety. So the first one that I want to talk about is this issue about what's referred to as ego anxiety. Albert Ellis defines this as the emotional tension that results when people feel that their self or personal self-worth is threatened and that they should or must have to perform well in order to be approved of by others. And then it would be absolutely catastrophic if they don't perform well and are not approved of by others as they should be or have to be. So that's fundamentally what Albert defines as ego anxiety. In my language, fundamentally, in my way of looking at it, ego anxiety exists because the person is unable to create and maintain a relationship with themselves that's fundamentally safe and secure, that doesn't require absolutistic or catastrophic ideas about themselves and the environment around them. Now, the next one I think that's really important, particularly in our culture, is the whole issue about performance anxiety. There's been many, many times when I've heard a parent on the sideline of a sporting event, trying to encourage their child, who's possibly winning, but maybe not putting enough effort in it, going, there's no prize for seconds. Now, sometimes, some parents want to think that they're funny, but most kids take that really seriously. So if I'm going to define performance anxiety, what is it? Well, it's essentially a strong or excessive feeling of fear or worry that's related to being able to accomplish something specific, or a fear of consequences of not being able to perform well. Now, I speak from personal experience in this particular instance because that was what I was experiencing with mathematics and then at university with statistics. And I had emotionally overinvested in performing well in a subject that I actually wasn't all that cut out to perform well in because my fundamental mathematical skills were, weak, low. Now, I did get it together and ended up doing 4 years of statistics, which sort of surprised most of all me, but also a lot of my friends and some of my family. Okay, so we need to be careful when we're doing something that we do not overinvest emotionally in it. We need to be able to go, you know what, I'm going to do my best, and if that's not good enough, so be it. It's, can I do it again? Yes, no, doesn't matter. Just going to do my best. The number of teenagers that I've worked with who've gone to critical exams, or at least in their mind they're critical, like the HSC or the SAT, whatever it is, and the not being able to sleep the night before, getting up into the shower, basically agitated, feeling that they need to go to the toilet all the time, throwing up in the shower, sweating profusely, getting into the exam, sitting down, and then just going blank. Now, one of the things that helps with dealing with performance anxiety is actually understanding what's going on, both physiologically and psychologically, so that you can actually use very targeted skills to deal with what you're experiencing. So let's move on to the next type of anxiety. And this one is by far one of the most common, and that's symptom anxiety. Now, this type of anxiety is usually triggered by a physiological sign or signs that the person interprets as the onset of an anxiety episode. So they're fundamentally anxious about being anxious, and then, it escalates. Now, on top of that, it can also be triggered by emotional or cognitive patterns the person associates with anxiety. So it might be believing that I've got intrusive thoughts. Now, we've got to be a bit careful here because some people have intrusive thoughts, but that's purely the result of a different psychological disorder. In fact, most times it could be a mental illness like bipolar or schizophrenia. But all of us, to some degree, have thoughts that sort of seem to pop up out of the blue. Oh, look at that. And so, one of the things that I work with people on is do not catastrophize this. You have lots and lots of thoughts. Some are conscious, some come out of the subconscious, and there's a whole bunch of stuff that half the time comes out of the unconscious and we get sideswiped. So those three are of a particularly prevalent presentation in my clinical practice. Now, but wait, there's more. Let me talk a little bit more about the sort of diagnoses and then put that together with the idea of, okay, but where's depression fit into that? Okay, so if I'm going to be diagnostic, I'm going to be talking about generalized anxiety disorder, which is GAD for short. It's fundamentally best described as an ongoing state of mental and or physical tension and nervousness. Now, a lot of people talk about this as without a specific cause or without the ability to take a break from the anxiety. Now, in my view, generalized anxiety disorder often ties into early childhood experiences wherein the child's sense of safety and security was challenged, either in an imagined way, like, there's a monster in my cupboard, and a lot of that stuff is actually often about separation anxiety. And yes, believe it or not, many adults have separation anxiety. that falls in under the sort of generalized anxiety disorder. My view, especially with anxiety and depression, is I do not believe that this stuff comes out of the blue. I think there's always, if we do a root cause analysis in this and we dig deep enough and get a strong enough assessment of the person's experience through their childhood, early adolescence, and adolescence, we usually find some stuff that goes, bingo, here it is. So that especially is true also of the next type of anxiety disorder, which is social phobia. And, when we talk about social phobia, we're not just talking about being shy, okay? This is when being shy is deeply intense, and the idea of socializing or speaking in the public, with the public, strangers, authority figures, or possibly even your friends, can cause a deep anxiety reaction and fear. Okay, so it's really quite intense. And, a lot of people say, just get over it. Well, as with a lot of anxiety issues, this isn't that easy. Including using, evidence-based therapies like CBT, REBT, and so on. It takes, in fact, often quite a lot of work. And part of that work is helping that person to reconstruct a healthier belief system, a different framework about themselves and the world that they're in, and establishing a better understanding of this sense of purpose within the broader context. And that's very difficult in a world where social media essentially is a battering ram on your sense of self. And I use that very specifically. It's like you cannot voice an opinion without getting trolled. It doesn't matter whether it's against, conservatives, or it's against liberals, or it's against Trump, or it's against, ScoMo, whatever it is. You're going to find that someone is going to take exception to you, and they will not come at you with a reasoned argument or with a debating style where you can, exchange ideas to try and get an understanding of where each other are coming from, but it's fundamentally just personal abuse. And I mean, it's the tool of the ignorant fundamentally if you can't get your own way or someone says something that you don't like, you're going to sledge them until they surrender or just dip out, and you feel like you've won as the bully, yeah, here am I, I've made my point, they crumbled. No, they didn't. Most of the time that person couldn't have been bothered spending more oxygen on your inanity. So, this is unfortunately the side effect of the social media sphere. And it creates an enormous amount of anxiety in people who participate in it. The sense of not being good enough, ego anxiety, the stuff that I'm not doing well enough, performance anxiety. It generates for a lot of people a social phobia. Okay, so this can be absolutely debilitating. Now, let me talk about a couple of others, and then I'm probably going to need to cut it short and carry on in the next podcast, which will be in a week's time, roughly, as long as I have. I'm not too overcome by painkillers after my surgery to replace my shoulder. Yes, folks, I'm becoming the augmented man, so I'm going to have, artificial shoulders, basically, that will no longer cause me pain and will allow me to do what I want to do, which is to surf, pick things up, reach for things without feeling like I need, 3 grams of narcotics. So we talked about social phobia. Let me talk a little bit about panic disorders, because I see a lot of this. But I need to be specific here as well. So essentially, panic disorders is when the person experiences severe feelings of doom that cause mental and physical symptoms that can be so intense that some people call an ambulance. One of the common things in working with men in the age group of about 40 to 50, 55 is that they'll talk about getting this pain in the chest that is just unrelenting, and then pain in the neck that radiates down into their arms. And I'm not being critical of that. They end up in accident emergency, being seen by a doctor who'll do all the workup on them, and then come out and go, "There's nothing wrong with your heart. Have you been really, really stressed?" And a lot of guys go, "No." What do you mean, really? Oh, well, it hasn't, there's been a lot of work on it, and I haven't been sleeping well, blah, blah, blah. And a lot of the guys that I work with, when they first come to see me, they can't believe the intensity of the pain, the physical pain, right? And this sense of, oh, my God, I'm going to die. That's almost, characteristic of this particular form of anxiety. In my life, I've only ever had one, and it was, despite all my training at the time and all my experience, the first thought that popped into my head, intrusive thought, was, oh shit, that'll be right, you're going to die. And then I pulled my socks up and go, just take a deep breath, hold it, breathe out slowly. It's okay. You're anxious. You're having, and in that case, I used the word anxiety attack, okay? Because I could bring myself right out of it. So the important thing with all of this, with all the anxieties, is to recognize that there are specific tools and strategies that you are able to use to alleviate the anxiety, to get on top of it. So there's a couple more that I want to talk about in the next podcast, which is specifically agoraphobia, phobias, post-traumatic stress disorder, and obsessive-compulsive disorders. Now, despite many, many people who will absolutely want to crucify me, I'm going to make a statement here that I should actually talk about ADD, ADHD as well under the anxiety umbrella, because fundamentally, in my experience working with many boys, many men, those labelled with ADD, ADHD, even when they've started as a child, have an emotional dysregulation and cognitive attention deficit. Now, I could argue that we fundamentally don't necessarily need a whole new category of this. This could have been, in my view, possibly accommodated within, and I know lots of people talk about neurodiversity and so on, and I sort of respect that, but we're all neurodiverse. I mean, I'm sure if someone dug around in how my brain operates, I'm probably as diverse as you can get in some respects, except that I'm very high on rational, logical, and objective thinking, and that I'm very organized, very structured, but not to the obsessive-compulsive degree. So on that note, have a think about this, because I also want you to think about how this ties up then with your belief systems. So if you have a belief system that you're not allowed to feel any sort of variance in your emotion, and you suddenly do feel, some variance in your emotion, guess what? You're going to get a little uptight. Now, to round this off, where's depression in this? Well, if you experience anxiety often enough, long enough, at a certain point, your system is going to run low on energy. Why? Because it's overusing adrenaline. Cortisol, a stress hormone, will have elevated chronically, and you're going to start to feel fatigued. Now, all of that has a direct impact on physiological function, like inflammatory processes in the body, fatigue, muscle contraction problems, respiratory issues. And so, after a while, you sort of get into a place where you're feeling crap all the time, and so you get flat. You start to feel helpless and hopeless, and, you get cranky, you're easily frustrated. And in amongst it all, your hormonal process is also dysregulated. A lot of men start to, experience low testosterone levels because they're overly stressed, they're anxious all the time. So, precursors like DHEA are interfered with by cortisol, and we've got this ongoing rolling problem. Okay. So please think about this. This stuff is on a spectrum, so we can go from very mild anxiety, apprehension anxiety, to the full-blown enchilada, which is a panic attack, and some people have had the experience of passing out. Interestingly enough, they often come around, and within the first 15 seconds, they're completely relaxed. They go, "Oh wow," and then the anxiety kicks in again because they go, "Oh shit, I passed out. That's terrible. Something really terrible could have happened to me," and so on and so on. So the awfulizing and the catastrophizing takes over, and the person is back again in an aroused state. Okay, let me sign off. I hope that's useful. If you want to get into any discussions, please let me know. You can find my details on www.gunterswoboda.com or www.makinggoodmengreat.com, and my contact details are there. It'd be lovely to get a note or some sign of life from the world of the listener to the podcast. I do get that from my clients that I see face to face who've tuned in, but I wouldn't mind a little bit of feedback from the bigger picture. Until next time, this is me signing off.
Thank you for listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. For more information on the Making Good Men Great movement, or for individual or group coaching sessions with Gunter, visit makinggoodmengreat.com. For inquiries regarding broadcast topics or appearing on the show, email Miranda@noirtainment.com. That's Miranda at NOIRTAINMENT.com.